And now it's Deborah Kobylt Live.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me today on Deborah Kobylt Live. Please welcome John Frank Levey, casting director du jour here in Hollywood, very well known for so many of the very big shows that he has cast talent in, and he'll be telling us about that. He also wrote this book, Right for the Role, breaking down barriers and just talking about the business and then some, and why I thought this was a particularly good time to have this interview with John. There's a lot going on. Actors, writers are not working. And what a great time to sort of hone in on your skills and really master as much as you can. So when everyone's working again, God willing, you're ready. So welcome, John. Welcome to our program.
Thank you very much, Deborah. I'm happy to be here and glad to have been invited. And
yeah,
thank our mutual friend, Blake Boyd, who put us together.
Yeah, I love Blake. He's a phenomenal actor, in particular theater actor. I love watching him in theater. I saw him at the Odyssey sometime back before COVID, and I was just awestruck at his talent. So thank you, Blake. Talk to me about Right for the Role. Why did you write this book?
Well, I didn't want to. I didn't have any instinct to write a book. But I did a podcast with a LA-based acting teacher, and she had recently written a book. Hers was more of a branding book about her technique teaching. But after we did this podcast, she said, "Oh, your stories are kind of interesting and fun, and you're smart and verbal, and you should write a book." And I thought, that sounds like a terrible idea. I come from a family of writers, and there's nothing more intimidating to me than a blank piece of paper. But as a courtesy, I met with the woman who helped her write her book, and Trudy Roth is her name. And she and I met, and I just loved her from the minute we met. And she drew me out in a way that was great. And she and I collaborated and made this book happen. And it's something that I'm very proud of now that I've been kind of manipulated into doing it.
Yeah. Let's go back, right? You said that you come from a family of writers. Let's talk about your family. Would you tell us about that?
Sure. My dad, Stanley, was a newspaper man for the New York Times. His beat was labor and economics. My mom is a PhD scientist, was a PhD scientist. I miss her so much. I talk about her in the first person or the present tense. And she wrote a lot of medical grant applications for the American Cancer Society. My older brother, Bob, has been a Washington Post columnist for decades. He's now retired. But he's been a writer all his life. I've been a talker all my life as a way of avoiding writing.
Yeah. And you mentioned in your book, I love how you talk about your childhood, how you would summer along the beach. Will you talk about that? Because I really believe that all of that sort of shapes who we are today. And, what was it like for you? Your imagination just sort of flowing freely as a kid, during the summers. Tell us.
Well, we had a house on Martha's Vineyard. We've rented houses first when I was very, maybe 5 or 6, but eventually my mom bought a place, and it was a free time.
Yeah.
They would sometimes just drop my brother and me off at the beach in Menemsha on Martha's Vineyard, and we would just play. And my brother often would meet with some of his friends, and they were, cliquish. And so I was mostly by myself, and my imagination and the waves and the sound and the freedom. I think you're very right that creativity that I was allowed to have and encouraged to have led to a creative life.
Gosh, could you remember what you would think about sometimes? Did you have scenarios in your head about shows or anything like that? What would you think about?
No, not so much that, but I think I talk about it in the book. I collected shells and driftwood, and then I would go back to the house at the end of the day and my mom would help me make a mobile out of them with fishing line, and I talk about that experience that later helped me understand balance when casting a pilot. So when you have George Clooney on one end of the driftwood and Anthony Edwards on the other end, you might have balance, and that concept. But when I was a kid, I think I was imagining giant fish coming out of the water and attacking all of my brother's friends, or just kind of abstract way, just really thinking about my life.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Anthony Edwards and George Clooney. We'll get to that in a minute, because clearly, in case people haven't figured it out yet, you were one of the casting directors, of course, for ER and lots of big shows, China Beach, so many. But we'll get to that in a second. So I sort of want to just lay the groundwork of how you even got out in Los Angeles in the first place. So here you are on the East Coast playing at the beach as a kid. I know that you did your initial work in New York, right? Talk to us about that, and then how you ended up in Los Angeles.
Well, actually, I grew up in Riverdale in the Bronx, but I went to college in Rochester, New York, where both of my parents grew up. I went to the University of Rochester, and that's where I did some acting, but a lot of directing in the theater. And it's also where I met a woman who later became my wife, and then the mother of my children. And we came to. She was from Kentucky. And New York didn't appeal to her, and I wanted to pursue the theater. And we wrote letters to friends in San Francisco and Boston and Los Angeles. And you remember letters?
Wait, when you said that, I said, wait, what did he do? He wrote a letter, like Pony Express. Wow, what a novel idea. Go ahead.
I attached it to a bird, and it flew to LA. And the people in LA were the first people who answered. And so after we got married in Washington, D.C., at my brother's living room, we went to her family's home in Southern Ohio. And then we took a bus to Chicago and got on a train, and we had a sleeper car. And we took the train all the way out to LA. And when we got here, it was like this year when it rained 5 days in a row when we first arrived in LA, and we thought to ourselves, mamas and the papas were liars. It does rain in Southern California.
Yeah, I could imagine, right? But those first few moments or first years, right? What were you thinking? Because obviously, the wheels were turning. What is it that you wanted to do? Did you always want to be a casting director? How did you get into the work?
No, I didn't even know what a casting director was when I first arrived in Los Angeles. I'd never heard the term. I didn't know what they did or who they were. I was kind of fantasizing about acting. I was. It's a long time ago, but I was kind of cute and kind of funny, and again, I was good at talking, so that's something actors have to be able to do. But I wasn't yet onto myself in a really authentic way. And as a result, I didn't have much to draw on as an actor. So I gravitated back towards directing, which was what I had done mostly in college. And I directed a play here, an Israeli playwright named Joshua Sobel, called The Night of the 20th. And it was sort of about a bunch of Eastern European hippies who formed the first kibbutz in what later became Israel. And I cast a young man in one of the roles who happened to be in a relationship with a guy who was the director of audience development at the Mark Taper Forum here in Los Angeles, Bob Schlosser. I miss him terribly. And Bob loved the production and introduced me to Gordon Davidson, who created and ran the Music Center and the Taper. And Gordon came to opening night, and a few weeks later, he offered me an opportunity to apply for the National Endowment for the Arts Directors Fellowship and be on staff at the Taper. It was a dream come true. And that's where I first met a casting director, because there was one on staff. And I directed a lot of readings of new plays. And there was a person from the literary department there working with the playwright on developing the play. And there was the casting director and me, and we would, hire the actors, and then I would rehearse with them for 3 or 4 days, and then we would do a presentation for the staff to see if the play was something that Mr. Davidson was interested in continuing the development process with. And that's when I first met a casting director and saw what they did and learned that they needed to speak all of the languages of the creative process: the writer, the actors, the director, everybody. And I thought to myself, that's an interesting job. And later, I got the opportunity to try my hand at it, and the rest is history, I guess.
I very often am watching a program, particularly the shows that stream, because they can really get deep into a character, right? And I think, my goodness, how did they find this person? How did they know to cast this person? It's really such a gift, such a job. How do you do what you do, John? Like, how do you have the instinct? Let's talk about ER. We're jumping around a little bit, but let's talk about ER. Everybody knows ER. So tell me about your work there, how you cast that show.
Well, Deborah, I'm a little bit more instinctive than some casting directors. I think some casting directors are what I would call encyclopedic. They watch everything, they catalog performances, they have incredible memories, and they really do it that way. But I do it. I call myself a vibist in the book. A dear friend of mine said, "That's someone who plays the vibraphones. That's not what you mean." And I said, "No, it is what I mean. I get people. I've had that instinctive thing since I was a kid. When my parents would do cocktail parties, I would sort of sit around and think, that person is like this, and this person is like that. And look, she's can't shut up, and he won't talk. And I've been assessing kind of privately in my mind the qualities that people have and the instincts that people have, and that is pretty much how I go about casting. Also, there's a lot of happenstance and chance. It happens that John Wells, who was the executive producer of ER, stopped by my office one day, and I was standing by a big shelf of filled with pictures and resumes of actors, and Anthony Edwards' picture was on top of a pile for Dr. Mark Green, for no particular reason except that I had opened that envelope that day and recently and put it there. And Anthony had gone from the goose of Top Gun. He had lost some of his hair and gotten a little bit older. And John looked over my shoulder and said, "Huh, that's a good idea." And so we brought Anthony in, and it turned out to be not just a good idea, but a great idea, because Anthony was the sort of heart and soul of the heroic doctors who made up ER. Clooney came about in a different way. He had what is called an overall deal with Warner Brothers Television, which is where I worked, and he was exclusive to Warner Brothers Television. And since we were a Warner Brothers show, I had access to him. He tells a story that I don't think is true about me delivering a copy of the script of the pilot of ER in a brown paper bag like it was a dirty magazine in his dressing room at when he was working on Sisters. But somehow he did get it. And George has always been really savvy about his own career. And even though at that time he had done a number of pilots that didn't go, the reason he had an overall deal at Warner Brothers is because he was what everybody was looking for: a 30-something-year-old, handsome, dashing, vulnerable, funny leading man. And however he got the script, he recognized that Dr. Ross had all of the qualities that he had, and all of the vulnerabilities and also the heroic love of children. And he came into a meeting in Barbara Miller's office with John Wells and the director Rod Holcomb and me, and he charmed the hell out of us. And he was a riot, and we offered him the part, and he actually took a small money cut in order to do ER. His deal called for a certain figure, and he actually did it for, I think, $5,000 less. It didn't hurt him in the long run.
Nope, not one bit. Can you tell when someone walks into a room who's going to be a star, who's going to really jump through the screen? And have you ever been wrong about it?
Sure, I've been wrong a bunch of times. We all are, but I do have that instinctive vibe of somebody who has what we have always called star quality. That doesn't mean they'll get there, because they could also have self-destructive qualities, or turn out to not be collaborators or team players, or easy to work with. There are a million reasons why someone can subvert their capacity to really succeed. But yeah, I can tell when someone has the goods that might translate to stardom. I've given first jobs to a lot of people who've gone on to do extremely well, and that's a source of great pride.
Let's talk about them. Name a few, would you, that our audience would know?
Sure. Well, Mariska Hargitay was somebody I tested for the television pilot of The Witches of Eastwick, which didn't go. She didn't get it either, but she was quite young, and so was I. But I've often said that casting is falling in love and then behaving yourself. And I fell in love with Mariska, and followed her and advocated for her. She tells a great story, which is in the last chapter of the book, Other People's Memories, I think. And where I helped her get a job on ER, which I think led to some extent to her getting the job, which she's now had for 20 something years on SV. Also Jessica Chastain, when she came out of Juilliard, I thought, oh my goodness gracious, this is something special. And I introduced her to John Wells, and we gave her a holding fee to be exclusive to John Wells Productions for 1 year at the very beginning of her career. Lucy Liu comes to mind. Sean Hattasey is one of my favorite actors. And he's, I think, the only actor who's 3 for 3. He read for a big guest part on ER and got it. He read for a lead on Southland and got it. And we offered him a part on Animal Kingdom, in which he did some of the best work that's ever been on television. Jeremy Allen White, who's the cat's meow now for his role as Chef Carmy on his wonderful show, The Bear, was an 18-year-old kid who was actually brought to my attention by the New York casting directors, Beth Bowling and Kim Misha, who I've collaborated with a number of times, who I love and respect. But we recognized him, and bless you. Are you allergic to my story?
No, okay, guess what? I've had to do that since the beginning of this show. The fact that I held it that long, I deserve, an Oscar for that one. I mean, I've just been holding it in, but here we go. Anyway, carry on. This is live Zooming, right? This is what happens. Anyhow, go ahead.
Yeah, well, so those are some of the people, and then there are lots of others as well. Kirsten Dunst did a little arc on ER. I think it's interesting in the book. Trudy Roth, who I wrote the book with, suggested that we make a list of all of the people who are in ER, and that takes up several pages. And if you go through that, you'll see lots of people who got jobs at the beginning of their careers. That way you'll have to buy the book to find out more.
It's a fantastic book. But I say that because a lot of people we talked about this, right? They've got some free time, and it's been very, very difficult. But there's no better time than now to pick up a book like this, write for the role, and find out some, I call them tricks of the trade, even if it's just, when, reading the room, if there is a room now that people go into an audition, what exactly is the show looking for? The casting director, do your homework, right? Can you give some advice to people on how they can prepare for a role other than the obvious?
Well, I mean, I think the obvious needs to be said to some extent.
Okay.
I think you really need to read the script and read the script and read the script. Acting teachers all over the country always say, make a strong choice. I would amend that to say, make a strong choice that's indicated by the script, not by some crazy fantasy you're having. If you're playing the two-line waitress who says, would you like another cup of coffee, boys? You don't need to bring a connection to your crazy grandmother who used to scream at you in Russian into the scene. It's not relevant, right?
Yeah.
But you have to have respect for the craft. You have to do your homework. You have to be on time. You have to know the words. All of those things are obvious, but you'd be surprised how many actors are lazy or just go about it without as much attention to detail and hard work as is really required. Acting is extremely difficult, and
Yes.
it's the actors who make it look easy and real and simple are magicians, because they've had to do a lot of work to get it to look that easy.
Mm. I don't know if you cast Ally McBeal, right? But I think of Callista Flockhart, and I think, my goodness, I can't imagine someone else in that role. And so many of the shows that you've done, China Beach, so many of them, which is why you've won 4 Emmys, by the way, I'd like to mention. The people you've cast, you're right, they make it look so easy. Just like, I don't know, a figure skater, right? Doing a triple axel. Well, that didn't happen overnight, right? It looks so effortless, but we all know it's not. Particularly, acting is so difficult. Not only do you have to memorize your lines, you have to feel your lines. You are that person. Does the person become the character? Do you know what I mean? Like, do they
Yeah,
embody
absolutely.
it? How does that even happen? Like, I'm not
Well,
a
I mean,
very good actor, right? So when I look
I
at,
think
go ahead.
I think, Deborah, that the stuff that is the character comes
Yeah,
from the person. I mean, obviously, it's their body and their voice, but it's also
yeah.
their training, their imagination, and their ability to tap into their experiences to find the places where who they are and what they've been through in their lives marries with the character and the circumstance of the character. And then a lot of it is your imagination, and actors have to have, gee, I've never had that experience. What would it be like to
Mm,
be a, a doctor in an emergency room where desperate people are in serious jeopardy? And how would I be able to handle all the blood and adrenaline and the crazy pace of it? And how would I get myself to be the kind of person who is an adrenaline junkie, for whom the environment of the ER is a pleasure in a weird way, rather than a challenge that isn't overcomable? And actors
mm.
find that way to marry themselves with the character, and then they can't do anything wrong once they've done that marriage.
Mm.
And
And
I've often no, go ahead.
no, please.
I was just going to say that for me, the when I say about a performance that I saw simple and real, then I feel it's great. I don't like to see a lot of acting, you know,
Yeah, I know that.
big
What you mean?
acting. It should be like a haircut. You never look like you need one, and you never look like you just got one. I got one yesterday. Does it look like I just got one?
I don't know. You're quite handsome, so I'm not quite sure when you got your haircut, but it looks just fine to me. It fits you. It suits you well. What about Zoom versus showing up in person? How are they doing auditions today, particularly in post-pandemic? I mean, I guess it's easier, right? You don't have to fly people across the country. Tell me about that. How has it changed?
Yeah. Well, it was gravitating towards technology anyway, and
Right.
then the pandemic came, and there were some, because we were able to get protocols in place so that production could resume after testing. We had to modify the bless you. We had to
Thank
modify
you.
the audition technique so that all original auditions were done by what's called self tapes, and then occasionally we would do Zoom callbacks, but there
Mm,
was no in-person auditioning during the pandemic. I think um, that well, now there's no auditioning of any kind going on because
mm,
of strikes, but I think that some in-person auditions are starting and will start to return, and that's something I fervently hope for, because while I get a sense of you here today on Zoom, I would get a better sense of you if we were in the same space. And since that's how I operate, I'm missing, we're telling stories about people. And that I think ought to involve intimate contact between us. And I don't, I mean, intimate, interpersonal. I certainly am not talking about casting couches. Um, that's the falling in love and then behaving yourself. Uh,
right.
but I get so much more information about you, meeting you in the waiting room, watching you when I introduce you to the director and the writer and the producer, watching you take an adjustment, uh, just getting to feel you in the real world. And so for me, I miss actors in the room very much. I'm not sure I'd be quite as good a casting director if it was all uh, zooming and self tapes. I mean, we succeeded during the last season of Shameless and Animal Kingdom, and we succeeded well, but it wasn't quite as much fun, and therefore we didn't bring as much, maybe as quite as much passion and love to it. And I think those are very, very important ingredients.
Mm.
Loving the process, loving the work, loving the actors, um, is an important part of my process.
Here's the $1 million question: AI. How could that change the business for actors? I've read a lot about what studios are considering, but then I've read a lot on the other side. Like, how could this change it, for the future?
Well, I think it's disgusting that you could own the likeness and physicality and voice of an extra for the rest of their life. And if they became a working actor or a star, uh, I wonder how that would impact their employability. I think technology's been great. It's made things more efficient, and it is the future, but it also robs us of human contact. And
Mm,
um, anything that robs us of human contact, I think, has to be dealt with very, very carefully. Um,
mm.
uh, someone, I don't know if this is appropriate to say. I did a podcast a couple of weeks ago for a wonderful casting director named Lisa Zambetti, and she said to me, when AI can get a boner, then I'm interested, but if not, then I'm not. And I think that's a primal way of saying it. If AI can really behave like a person, well, so be it. But I don't believe they can now, and I hope they never can. Otherwise,
What
we're all
about
in Woody Allen's movie where you walk into the orgasmatron instead of actually interacting with another human being.
Do you think perhaps actors, writers, directors are all just going to maybe start producing their own content where they don't even need the studios anymore, because some of what's being proposed really sounds preposterous, just as what you talked about with owning your likeness if you're just an extra in a candy store. So is it going to perhaps get to the point where they're just saying, you know what, forget it, we'll do our own work? What do you think
Well,
could
I think
happen?
that there will be a push towards independent projects and
Yeah,
self-created content. But
yeah,
in this day and age, and increasingly, uh, money is the engine
I know.
of creativity, and the studios and the streamers have a hell of a lot more of it than any group of individual creatives have.
Mm, mm,
So, you could maybe you could raise 1 million or 3 million to make a independent movie, but you couldn't raise 20, and you certainly couldn't raise 60 or 80.
yeah.
Uh, and so I don't think the studios or the networks uh, or the streamers are in trouble of disappearing. But I do think it will encourage independent creation, and I think that's a good thing. That's one
Mm.
of the benefits.
What have you learned from being in this business for so long? What has it done to you personally and professionally that you could share with us?
Well, I think the main thing that it's done, Deborah, is that it's shown me that artists, particularly, but people in general, need to be on a journey of self discovery and self actualization, of growth, of change. And that way, we can be better husbands, fathers, mothers, sisters, brothers, and creative people. And whatever we are in, whatever the stuff of our life is, if we know who we are and what we can contribute, we can be better at it. And
Yeah.
I think I think that's the main thing I've learned. And the other important thing to me that I knew as a young man, both from sports and then from sort of hippie life, is that community and collaboration is so important. And not everybody is the star or the quarterback or or whatever, the leader. And why the book is called Right for the Role is because it really is the story of me discovering the role I was right for, where I got a chance to shine and participate in a creative community that was making excellence the norm.
Mm. Beautifully said. Absolutely beautifully said. I hope that that really inspires our audience to pick up this book, Right for the Role. There's a lot that you can learn in this book. If you're an actor, if you're in any part of the business, it's a beautiful book. And it's not even just for folks in the business. I learned quite a bit reading this myself about your journey and about the heart that you've been into every bit of work that you've done in this business. So thank you very much, because without people like you, we wouldn't get some of the terrific performances that we enjoy. And I really mean that. So thank you for joining us. And please, people, pick up Right for the Role. Fantastic book. And I guess you
Let's
could
just
pick
say
it.
that it's available on Amazon. And also, if you're in LA, there are some autographed copies at the Barnes and Noble on Ventura Boulevard in Studio City.
I was
Or
literally just going to say that, where people can pick it up. Are you doing any signings or anything like that? Any other signings?
I hope so. Not yet, but
Yeah.
I'm working with an old friend who's trying to help me set up an opportunity at East West Players here,
Oh,
one of the most important Asian American theater companies in the country, and I'm going to do a thing there. I'm also, I did a launch at the Smokehouse across the street from Warner Brothers, where I worked for all those many years, and that was almost a year ago. And I may do a sort of annual or a 1 year anniversary of the launch of the book and do another signing there.
oh, you have to. That's such a legendary place. I love it. In fact, our engineer, their studios are literally right down the block. He probably goes there every day for his French fries. So I absolutely love the Smokehouse, and you never know who you're going to spot in there too. Anyway, thank you so much, John Frank Levey, for joining us. Please pick up Right for the role. Really terrific book, a fun read. And by the way, you mentioned, that you were, kind of a handsome guy back in the day. Oh my gosh, these pictures of you in your book, really handsome guy. I was looking at these saying, wow, beautiful. I enjoyed it. I also enjoyed just reading about your early life. And I love the way you put the entire book together. I got the entire picture of who you are and how that blended into all the work that you've done. So thanks to you. And thanks everybody for joining us today on our podcast, Deborah Kobylt Live. Thank you again to our mutual friend, Blake Boyd, who introduced us. And you could find this interview on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. And then we modify it into an audio version. You can find us on iHeartRadio, on Amazon, Apple Podcasts, just about anywhere you get your podcasts. Put us in and you'll find us. Thank you again for joining us. Tell your friends, pick up the book, and also reach out to John on social media. See you next time. Bye-bye.